Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a topic that is just profoundly misunderstood. I want you to imagine noticing confusing, really distressing eating behaviors in yourself or maybe someone you love, only to be told by doctors, well, you don't quite fit a specific medical label. It's heartbreaking, right? But listen, your experience is valid, and today we're going to trace the exact chronological journey of what happens when these symptoms fall into that gray area, and more importantly, how to finally find clarity.
So ask yourself, what actually happens when an eating disorder doesn't fit the mold? We are so conditioned to look for textbook anorexia or textbook bulimia, but the reality for our main character in this story, the person actually going through it, is that the start of their journey usually leaves them completely isolated and confused. They fall into this murky gray area, suffering in total silence and wondering if they even deserve help in the first place.
But get this, what's truly surprising is just how common this gray area actually is. Conditions that are hard to label, specifically unspecified feeding or eating disorder or UFED, along with OSFED, they make up a staggering 60% of all eating disorders in some studies. 60%. That is the hidden majority. If your symptoms defy a simple label, you're actually in the largest group of people seeking recovery. No one is truly alone in this, even if it feels like it. Okay, let's dive right into this structured journey, mapping out exactly how we'll break down these medical concepts today. First, we'll look at when symptoms defy labels. Second, defining UFED and its types. Third, understanding clinical differences. And finally, pathways to holistic treatment. Let's start right in with Section 1, when symptoms defy labels, because really, validation is the very first step toward recovery.
I really want to let this truth sink in. The absence of a clear label absolutely does not make symptoms any less real or any less deserving of care, period. Experiencing severe distress without a precise, textbook diagnosis, that is still a medical emergency. People living with UFED face the exact same severe risks associated with things like anorexia and bulimia, and the consequences are just as detrimental to their lives. You see, while the official diagnosis itself might be unspecified, the early physical and emotional markers in a person's journey are very real and highly noticeable. You might see them become excessively socially withdrawn, or they just kind of disappear after meals. It's the development of these obsessive food rituals, or constantly hiding behind baggy, loose clothing. Physically, it can manifest as edema, which is the swelling of the cheeks from frequent vomiting, or developing calluses on their hands and knuckles. These are incredibly visible cries for help in a story that often goes totally untold.
Which brings us to Section 2, defining UFED and its types. It is time to demystify some of this medical jargon.
So, clinically speaking, unspecified feeding or eating disorder, or UFED, applies when eating behaviors cause significant distress or impairments, but they simply do not meet the full criteria for another standard diagnosis. It is absolutely crucial to understand here that UFED is not a lesser or mild disorder. Not at all. It is a severe condition. The individual suffering just happens to fall outside of the strict, rigid diagnostic boxes created by the medical community.
Let's look at a specific example, pica. This is persistently eating non-food substances, we're talking things like chalk, soap, paper, or ice, regularly for over a month. What's absolutely fascinating and crucial to understand about the person struggling with pica is that it's typically not driven by a desire to lose weight or change their appearance. Because of that, it's incredibly hard to spot, and often it's only discovered after the person suffers from cracked teeth, toxicity, or really severe infections.
Next up is rumination disorder. This one involves repeatedly regurgitating food for over a month. But here's the key difference. Unlike bulimia, rumination lacks the conscious effort to purge. It can actually occur spontaneously, totally without intent. The food might be re-chewed, re-swallowed, or spat out. If this chapter of the patient's story goes untreated, it leads to devastating malnutrition.
And then we have chewing and spitting, often abbreviated as CHSP. This is where someone chews food to enjoy the taste, usually foods they've labeled as bad, but then they spit it out instead of swallowing, just to avoid gaining weight. We have to acknowledge the intense, suffocating shame people feel around CHSP. There's so little awareness about it, which keeps people isolated, but listen, it is driven by a genuine, terrifying fear of weight gain, and it absolutely deserves clinical attention. Let's jump into Section 3, understanding clinical differences. Let's look at the exact thresholds we're dealing with here.
This divide is so easily illustrated when we look at them side by side. Traditional diagnoses require these incredibly strict markers. You must have a severely low body weight, or you must purge exactly this many times a week for 3 straight months. But think about the reality of human suffering. What if a person has a massive, paralyzing fear of gaining weight, and they heavily restrict their eating, but their body weight just isn't considered low enough by a standard medical chart? What if they purge due to sporadic stress, but they don't actually binge eat? Well, that is exactly when their journey leads to a UFED diagnosis.
These pathways show the incredibly frustrating middle chapter of this story, how easily a real person can slip right through the cracks of the medical system. Maybe they only purge sporadically when triggered by high stress, going months symptom-free in between. Or perhaps they're misusing laxatives without binging, and only discover their diagnosis when they end up in the ER with severe dehydration. They endure quietly until their health crashes. But slipping through the cracks doesn't mean they don't need comprehensive help.
Which brings us to the turning point. Section 4, Pathways to Holistic Treatment. This is where the narrative shifts toward hope.
The real breakthrough happens when we realize treatment isn't just a one-size-fits-all generic prescription. Facilities like Eating Disorder Solutions near Dallas offer varied levels of care based entirely on a person's medical stability. Whether someone needs 24/7 residential care to stabilize, or maybe a virtual outpatient program they can do right from their living room, the right level of care actually exists to meet them exactly where they are in their journey.
And once you're in care, you're supported by an entire multidisciplinary team using proven, evidence-based therapies. You've got CBT to change harmful thought patterns, DBT to build emotional regulation skills, ACT, trauma-informed care, plus dedicated nutrition therapy. They don't just treat a symptom, they treat the whole person, addressing those deep emotional triggers alongside the physical stabilization. It's a total game changer.
This holistic progression, this represents the ultimate transformation in our story. Step 1 isn't just about forcefully stopping a behavior. It's about actively discovering a genuinely healthier relationship with food. Step 2 is learning how to actually cope with unwanted emotions without falling back on eating disorder behaviors. And step 3, that's developing a truly sustainable, joyful lifestyle, making time for friends, lowering stress, and finding real balance.
True recovery also requires recognizing that everyone's environment is totally unique. Tailored care exists because, let's be real, the intense pressures on a college student are vastly different from the performance demands on an athlete or the stressors of a working professional. There are even specialized affirming programs for the LGBTQ+ community, designed to provide care that truly understands that individual's specific context and identity.
I want to just pause for a second on this quote from the clinic. Eating disorders are not a choice, but are serious mental illnesses. This right here is the absolute core philosophy of compassionate care. If you have been carrying around this heavy burden of shame, thinking you should just be able to snap out of it, or that your unspecified diagnosis means you're just making bad choices, I want to lift that burden off your shoulders right now. It is a severe illness, and you deserve empathetic, professional help.
I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought, one that is beautifully explored in episode 10 of the Eating Disorder Solutions podcast, which inspired a lot of today's deep dive. Just visualize it for a moment. 1 year from now, what could your life look like beyond your eating disorder? Healing is absolutely possible, even when your symptoms completely defy the labels. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. And remember, reaching out for help isn't a weakness, it's literally the very first step of your healing journey.